You think you can just waltz in here and take over? Like you own the place? Oh, sweetheart, I do own the place. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken grievances. The wife stood her ground, her eyes blazing with a fire that had been smoldering for far too long. I've had enough of your meddling, enough of your backhanded comments, enough of you. And with that, she did the unthinkable, her hand flew through the air, landing with a resounding slap across the face of her mother-in-law. The older woman staggered back, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock and fury. Hours earlier, the day had started like any other. The wife had woken up to the sound of her husband's alarm, the familiar beeping pulling her from a restless sleep. She had been on edge for weeks, her patience wearing thin as her mother-in-law's presence in their home had become more and more overbearing. It wasn't just the constant criticism, the passive-aggressive remarks about her cooking, her cleaning, her parenting, it was the way her husband seemed oblivious to it all, brushing off her concerns with a dismissive, "She's just trying to help. Don't take it so personally." But it was personal. Every comment, every suggestion, every disapproving look was a shot aimed directly at her confidence, her sense of self-worth. She had tried to brush it off, to be the bigger person, but the cracks were starting to show. And today, of all days, her mother-in-law had decided to push her over the edge. It started at breakfast. The wife had been in the kitchen, scrambling eggs for her son, when her mother-in-law had walked in, her lips curled into that infuriatingly smug smile. "You know, dear, scrambled eggs are so basic. Don't you think he deserves something a little more inspired?" The wife had clenched her fists, her fingers tightening around the spatula as she forced a smile. "He's 5. He likes scrambled eggs." But the comment had stung, and it had been the first in a long line of jabs. By the time dinner rolled around, the wife was at her breaking point. She had spent the day cleaning the house from top to bottom, only to have her mother-in-law walk in and immediately start rearranging the furniture, muttering under her breath about how things should be. The wife had bitten her tongue, focusing on the task at hand, preparing a meal that she knew would be picked apart no matter how perfect it was. It was during dinner that the final straw came. The wife had served a perfectly roasted chicken, complete with a side of mashed potatoes and steamed vegetables. Her husband had complimented the meal, but her mother-in-law had simply sighed, pushing the food around her plate with her fork. "It's adequate, I suppose. Though, I do think the chicken could have used a bit more seasoning. And these vegetables, well, they're a bit soggy, don't you think?" The wife had felt the heat rise in her cheeks, her hands trembling as she set down her fork. "If you don't like the food, you don't have to eat it." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made her husband look up from his plate, his brow furrowed. "Honey, it's fine. Mom's just giving her opinion." "Her opinion?" The wife had stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Her opinion? Your mother has been undermining me since the day she arrived. She criticizes everything I do, my cooking, my cleaning, the way I raise our son. And you just sit there and let her do it." Her husband had opened his mouth to respond, but her mother-in-law had beaten him to it. "Oh, please. If I don't say something, who will? Someone has to help you see that you're not quite up to par. You're a good mother, but you could be so much better if you just listened to my advice." That had been the breaking point. The wife had felt something inside her snap, a dam bursting after weeks of holding back. She had taken a step forward, her eyes locked on her mother-in-law's. "You think you know better than me? You think you can just waltz in here and take over? Like you own the place?" And then it had happened. "Oh, sweetheart, I do own the place." The slap that followed had been swift, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. The mother-in-law had staggered back, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock and fury. "How dare you," she had hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You ungrateful little—" "Say it," the wife had challenged, her voice low and dangerous. "Go ahead. Say what you really think of me." For a moment, no one moved. The room was silent, the air thick with tension. And then, her husband stepped forward, his hands raised as if to defuse the situation. That's enough. Both of you. But the wife wasn't done. She turned to her husband, her eyes blazing with a fire that made him take a step back. You're going to stand there and defend her? After everything she's put me through? Her husband hesitated, his eyes flicking between his wife and his mother. I'm not defending anyone. I just think. No, she interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. No more excuses. No more brushing it off. I'm done. The mother-in-law's eyes narrowed and opened her mouth to speak, her words dripping with venom. You're done? Well, let me tell you something. The slap echoed through the kitchen, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The husband's hands twitched at his sides, his face pale as he stared at his wife, then at his mother. Jesus Christ, he muttered under his breath, raking a hand through his thinning hair. His mother's cheek was already starting to redden, her lips pressed into a tight line, but it was the look in her eyes, cold, calculating, that made the wife's stomach twist. I think, the husband said slowly, his voice firm but strained, I need to talk to my mother alone. The wife turned to him, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. What? She demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. You're going to talk to her? After what just happened? He held up a hand, his expression pinched. Please, he said, his tone brooking no argument. Just, give me a minute. The wife opened her mouth to protest, but the look on her husband's face stopped her. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of resolve, that she hadn't seen in years. Reluctantly, she nodded, her fists still clenched at her sides. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. But this isn't over. The mother-in-law smirked, her lips curling into a smug smile as she smoothed her blouse. Oh, darling, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, it's been over for a long time. The wife's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to turn on her heel and stalk out of the kitchen, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the low murmur of voices behind her as she made her way to the living room, where their 5-year-old son was engrossed in a cartoon, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding in the kitchen. She sank onto the couch beside him, her hands trembling as she ran her fingers through his messy hair. Mommy? Her son asked, glancing up at her with wide, innocent eyes. Are you okay? She forced a smile, her throat tight. I'm fine, sweetheart, she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. Just, tired. In the kitchen, the husband crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze fixed on his mother. What the hell was that? He demanded, his voice low but laced with frustration. His mother raised an eyebrow, her expression calm. What was what? She asked innocently, though the gleam in her eyes betrayed her. You know damn well what I'm talking about, he snapped, running a hand over his face. You've been pushing her buttons all day. Why can't you just be civil? Civil, she repeated, her tone sharp. She's the one who slapped me, Daniel. I'm not the problem here. You're not exactly helping, either, he shot back, his voice rising. Every time you're here, it's like you're trying to start something. Why can't you just let us be happy? His mother's eyes narrowed, her lips thinning into a tight line. Happy, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Is that what you call this? Living with a woman who can't even cook a decent meal or raise her child properly? Daniel's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. That's not fair, Mom. She's doing the best she can. Her best isn't good enough, his mother snapped, her tone cutting. You deserve better, Daniel. You always have. He stared at her, his chest heaving with the effort of keeping his temper in check. I don't need you to tell me what I deserve, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm a grown man, Mom. I can make my own decisions. Then why don't you start acting like it? She shot back, her eyes blazing. You let her walk all over you, Daniel. You always have. He took a step closer to her, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You need to stop, he said, his tone firm. I mean it, Mom. This ends now. She blinked, taken aback by the steel in his voice. Or what? She challenged, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Or I'll have to start making some tough decisions, he said quietly. And I don't think you're going to like the outcome. For a moment, they stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, his mother's shoulder slumped, her expression softening. I just worry about you, Daniel, she said, her voice trembling. You're my son. I only want what's best for you. He sighed, the fight draining out of him. I know, Mom, he said, his tone weary. But what's best for me is my family. My wife. My son. And if you can't respect that, then, maybe it's better if you don't come around as much. Her eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. You're choosing her over me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel hesitated, his heart aching at the hurt in her eyes. It's not about choosing sides, he said, his voice firm but gentle. It's about respecting boundaries. And if you can't do that, then I don't know how else to protect my family. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned on her heel and walked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. Daniel watched her go, his chest tight with a mix of relief and guilt. He took a deep breath, running a hand over his face, before turning to head back to the living room. His wife was sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around their son, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Hey, he said softly, crouching down in front of her. We need to talk. She looked at him, her expression wary. What did she say? She asked, her voice trembling. He reached out, taking her hand in his. It doesn't matter, he said, his tone firm. What matters is that I'm here. With you. With our son. And I'm not going to let anyone come between us. Her eyes filled with tears. Promise, she whispered, her voice breaking.